Um, it's nice to be able to be here, and thank you, Jan, for the kind invitation. I'm an alumni of the Nottingham Trent University from 1994 was when I graduated. And for those of you that didn't quite hear that, it was 1994, not 1894. So I'm James Ricks. I'm the head of data centers and industrial for Malaysia and Indonesia for Jones Lang LaSalle. I've been involved in the data center industry since 2007, and I've run data center projects in 14 different countries over 3 continents. I speak regularly at conferences. In fact, next week I'm speaking at 2 different conferences in Malaysia and in Jakarta in Indonesia. And it's my pleasure to be able to present a little bit about data centers and some of the current challenges to you today. If you have a piece of paper and a pencil or pen handy, if you can write a list of numbers 1 through 7, you'll find that to be incredibly helpful in the next few slides. So we'll just move into our first set of slides. So who's the most important person in this list of 7 characters? That's why you need a list of 1 to 7. Who can you write down that you know on that particular list? And I think I'll find that the answers are split very much between those 35 and below will get some, and those 35 and above will get others. Maybe not everybody will get all 7. We will see. So what is the cloud? Well, to help me understand what is the cloud, I brought a friend along today. My friend called Colin is going to explain a little bit more about the cloud and data centers.
Colin, where do you live?
I live in a data center.
What's a data center?
A data center is a big building full of lots and lots of computers called servers.
Okay, so who else lives there?
Pretty much the whole internet does. Fortnite, YouTube, Google, Facebook, Xbox Live, Sims and Roblox all live in data centers around the world.
Oh wow, so what else is in a data center?
Well, the servers, or computers all get stacked up in cabinets called racks, and they all line up in rows. Some data centers have thousands of servers and can be bigger than football pitches, which is very big indeed.
So how does a data center work?
So data centers need 2 very important things, electricity, and a way to keep everything cool. Data centers will have massive engines called generators, which can keep the whole data center running in the event of a power cut. It takes a little time for the engines to start up, so if there is a power cut, they have huge batteries which can keep everything going in between. Some of these battery packs are as big as your house. Very big, wouldn't you agree?
Okay, you said they need a way to keep everything cool. Why's that?
Well, you know when you use your laptop, tablet or phone, and after a while it gets warm? If you can imagine 1 million of those, that's what happens in a data center. All of the computers make so much heat, the building has to keep it cool or the equipment would break. Depending on where in the world the data center is, the way it is cooled can differ, but most are like a type of air conditioning the same as in a car. Hot air is cooled down by water, and that makes the air cold again. Some data centers do some really cool stuff with their hot air, like use it to heat houses or even swimming pools. Very cool stuff in my opinion.
Okay, so now I know how the data center works. How do you get to my house?
Well, that's the internet. The whole world is connected by cables that run under the sea and under the ground. These cables carry data so fast it's crazy. A message can travel from London to New York in 71 milliseconds. That is 7 round trips to New York every second. It's incredible stuff. Once the data reaches your house or classroom, it's normally then sent by wireless or Wi-Fi to your device.
So everything happens all on its own automatically?
Kind of, but only if the data center has been designed and built well, and looked after properly, of course. The people who do this are engineers and technicians. They fix things when they break and they check on everything regularly to test everything is working okay.
So these people, are they the superheroes of the internet?
Along with me. Yes, exactly.
Thanks, Colin. You're the best. Bye.
Well, I'm certainly in the top 3. Goodbye, human.
So thanks, Colin. It's given us a little bit of an overview of data centers. It's a video that was prepared some time ago, but it really helps us understand what data centers are about. Now, as this is primarily a CIBSE group, you may understand what a megawatt of IT power is, or a megawatt of power. For those that don't, think of your domestic kettle at home. That's about 1.5 kilowatts. So to make 1 megawatt of IT power, you would need 750 kettles, boiling 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The 3 facilities that you see here are approximately 60 megawatts of IT power. 60 megawatts is 45,000 kettles. The site just to power the IT is 135,000 kettles, boiling 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. If you want to see the scale of these buildings, the bottom right-hand corner shows you a 15-seat minibus in the car park. So all of this, the power, is just to power the IT. To power everything else, it requires more power. But remember, a data center itself does not use very much power. It is the IT equipment inside the facility that does. So moving on to look a little bit further then, what happens every minute? Well, here we've got 3 graphics that show us what's changed from 2016 through to 2023. And one of the figures I was struck with is we are sending 1 million more emails a minute in 2023 than we were back in 2016. That is an awful lot of data, a lot of ones and zeros that are moving between points. But who's used a data center today? If anybody on this call thinks they've not used a data center, I'm unsure as how you've joined a Teams call, because it runs through a data center. All of these devices that we see here and all of these activities run through data centers. Every day you are using a data center for some means or other, whether it's the camera, gaming, your alarm clock, ordering food, GPS for your travel. All of it uses a data center. And these are the undersea cables that run throughout the world and really swaddle the whole world in data. Well, to say that, well, how many cables are there? Well, 745,000 miles of cabling spins around the world. That's an awful lot of cables, an awful lot of data. Everywhere is connected. And you can go onto various sites and see where all these connections are. The little round dots that you see in the center here, these are cable landing stations where these undersea cables actually land. But what's used? Well, just take, for example, a Google search. Every time you carry out a Google search, it takes as much energy as it does to light a low energy light bulb for 17 seconds. The average person probably carries out anywhere between 1,000 and 1,500 Google searches a year. Now that's producing the same amount of greenhouse gas emissions as driving a fossil fueled car a mile down the road. You haven't gone anywhere. You've just sat in front of your screen. But what about ChatGPT? Well, ChatGPT 3 produces 8.3 tons of carbon a day. But because we don't see what is produced, because it's always on, we think there is maybe no perceived cost to it. It is a thought process. You need to think before you click. But because it's always on, we tend not to so much. But what are some of the current issues that are affecting data centers and data center environment and infrastructure? Well, to look at some of the first things, we need to look at the past. We've talked a lot maybe about electric vehicles. Well, in the center of the screen here is an electric cab from 1897. This had a range of about 25 to 30 miles, a top speed of 12 miles an hour. In central London today, the top speed, Transport for London says, is 8 miles an hour. A pure electric driven taxi is about 60 miles. But it takes 2.5 to 3 hours to charge. You could change the batteries in this taxi in about 3 minutes. When I was originally at college back in 1980, the BBC film Hydrogen, the Forever Fuel, was being promoted. Hydrogen is still being promoted as the forever fuel. Have we learned from what has gone before? The words of George Santayana in the top right-hand corner are probably quite appropriate at this point. Look at building materials for the superstructure of any building, particularly data centers, often built out of concrete and steel. But why not timber? It's one of the oldest building materials known to man. You can achieve 50-meter spans with glulam beams. You reduce the carbon content of the superstructure by up to 40%. And it lasts a long time. Here you see some 16th century buildings, no more than 10 miles from where I'm sat at the moment in East Sussex. In fact, I used to live in the one on the bottom side of the picture. All of those last a very long time. Sustainable forests in Europe mean that they can continually replanted. Why are we not using it? We need to learn lessons from the past. We can't have a discussion of anything to do with data centers or data without mentioning AI. Everything has got something connected with AI. But when we think about AI, it takes an awful lot of power to be able to drive that. You look at the table at the bottom of the right-hand corner of the screen.
Sorry, I have a question for you. How would it work with the disability people?
I'm sorry, could you please repeat?
How would it work with the disability people? I put it in the chat, and I want to know how this would benefit with the people who are disabled.
Well, for disabled people, there are lots of advantages that that artificial intelligence can bring, and also the applications that run through data centers. There's a lot of ability this gives for people to be able to communicate, to take in knowledge. All of that is available for everybody that is both able and not so able as others. Getting back to what I was saying about density in racks, when I first started in the data center industry, the amount of power a rack would draw would be about 2 kilowatts. Now we're seeing racks drawing in excess of 60 kilowatts an hour, and that is an awful lot of power. We had difficulty then in being able to cool that. So moving on to our next slide. Cooling is the big problem. It is a big hot topic. Air is only efficient in cooling up to about 15 kilowatts in a rack. So we have to use a different type of cooling technology. The top right-hand picture is a Bitcoin farm, as is the middle picture of the three cooling technologies. That is a single-phase immersion cooling technology being used. The servers are plunged into a bath of oil or dielectric fluid, and the fluid is pumped through the servers to a heat exchanger at the end. Then it is taken away to be ejected or recycled outside of the building. Two-phase dielectric fluid cooling systems actually boil the fluid within a sealed container, and this condenses on a heat exchanger at the top of the server and then condenses back down into the bath of fluid. The heat exchanger then extracts the heat to be rejected. One of the difficulties with those is they contain PFAS chemicals, and those are being phased out. They are forever chemicals. They do not degrade. Looking at the bottom one is cold plate technology, where you have a heat exchanger placed on the top of the CPU or GPU within the server. Those of you that are gamers may have a similar type of technology attached to the CPUs in your desktop machines that then goes through to a radiator and fans blow the heat out through the radiator, similar to a car in actual fact. The technology on the left-hand side is rear door cooling. Again, that takes air in through the front of the rack, through a heat exchanger and ejected out of the back of the rack. All of these ways are more efficient than just flooding a room with cold air. That does not enable high density racks of 60 kilowatts or more to be cooled effectively. You may have seen a lot in the press about data centers and how bad they are. Some countries have brought in moratoriums or restrictions upon them. Singapore, Ireland, Netherlands, Denmark, Germany, China, some states in America are restricting data centers being built. Why? Well, there may be problems with power. Ireland has a particular problem with power for data centers. They don't have enough. There's another problem with water poverty. A lot of legacy facilities use water and perhaps inefficiently. So that needs to be taken care of. The societal tensions that data centers cause need to be addressed by data center owner operators up front to make sure that this is really effective in how it is being dealt with. But there are ways to measure what a data center does. There are all ISO standards. These standards are used now within data centers, particularly within Europe, to report back to the EU. You have to measure according to these standards. If you're measuring according to what you think you need to measure, you're measuring something else. You're certainly not measuring what the ISO standards say. So that all needs to be reported back, because at the moment, we don't know how much power data centers actually take. We have an idea, but no real data to be able to put behind that. Power usage effectiveness, PUE, is a metric that is often used and abused when it comes to measuring the efficiency of data centers. But it's not an efficiency metric. It's just the extra amount of load that the facility takes on top of the IT. So a data center of 1.2 PUE means that the 1 is the IT, the 0.2 is the extra load that the facility takes. But where are you measuring it? What are you deducting out of that facility load? Are the fans in the servers deducted out of that facility load? Well, you look at any PUE metric and it is a snapshot in time. Just like the snapshots in time of that very fine and highly attractive young man at the bottom left-hand corner there, they are all snapshots in time of the same person, but sometimes some of them have had a few hard winters. But we need to measure on a 12-month basis. We can't measure just on 1 month and say that's it. No, it needs to be on a 12-month basis. Anything else, anything less than that is partial. And the other thing about data centers, they're a bit like children. You can't compare them. You may have 2 data centers, one next door to the other, but they may have very different use cases. If you have one data center that has all of its servers virtualized, and you can virtualize 35 servers onto one physical server, the power goes down, but the PUE goes up. So we need to make sure that we are understanding what the metrics are actually telling us. Let's have a little look for a moment at renewables and sustainability. Now, renewable power, wind turbines. You've seen them, maybe you love them, maybe you don't. They make a very eerie noise when you're near them. But what happens after 20 or 25 years when the blades come to end of life? Currently, the major way that they are recycled is landfilled. Yes, I know they can be made into bike shelters and smoking shelters, but how many of those do you actually need? You've got 3 80-meter blades on a wind turbine. That's an awful lot of bike shelters and smoking shelters that could be made out of those. Vestas, who produce wind turbine blades, say they have discovered a new chemical process, that will disassemble these composite blades. They've not yet said how environmentally friendly that process is. Is it available at scale? Is it open sourced? Take, for example, Volvo, the car manufacturer, who invented the 3-point seatbelt back in the late 1950s. They patented that on an open patent so that everybody could use it at no cost. How many lives have been saved by the use of a seatbelt in a car? In fact, how many cars have you got into recently that did not have a seatbelt? If they had patented it and charged for that patent, how many lives would have been lost? Sometimes it's about doing the right thing. But unfortunately, we're not always very good at that. Nuclear, hydrogen. These are the answers to all problems. Now, the central graphic there at the top is a small-scale nuclear reactor. Would you like one at the end of your road? Maybe not, but they're pretty safe. They've been in submarines and aircraft carriers for years. The small nuclear reactors that are being developed at the moment, the one in the UK by Rolls-Royce, is about 400 megawatts. That's much larger than most data center sites. But the permitting to bring a new nuclear reactor online is probably in excess of 10 years. Hydrogen. Hydrogen always seems to be the answer. We haven't quite figured out what the question is that goes for that answer, because most hydrogen today is created by burning gas. So it's a brown hydrogen. It's not green. It's not being generated by renewable energy. Microsoft ran a test in running a data center on hydrogen. Yes, it's completely possible, but the amount of hydrogen that you need to run a 60 megawatt facility, like we saw at the beginning, for 24 hours would be 100,000 kilos of hydrogen. Your transportation will be coming in constantly, topping up the sphere to hold the hydrogen. How would those vehicles be powered? Probably not by hydrogen. So you need to think, well, have we actually thought this through? The transport mechanism for the use of hydrogen has not yet been fully developed. There is a thought that in some countries, the gas grid will be injected with up to 20 to 25% of hydrogen. That's maybe a thought. I've not yet seen it in actuality. In fact, because of the size of the hydrogen molecules being a lot smaller than gas, that could cause additional problems, with leakage and then recurrent ideas around explosion. We need to think too about a circular economy where it affects data centers. Where does the circular economy start? Well, it starts at design. The raw materials, we looked earlier at raw materials for superstructure. But how are we then going to distribute it, transport it to site? What about the collection and recycling of those materials later? It needs to be thought through fully, and it forms part of your Scope 3 emissions as to how you deal with things like e-waste. If you look at here, the Scope 3s as they affect data centers, Scope 3 relates to a lot of the equipment, the commuting, etc., for data center owner operators to report on. In fact, if we are going to site data centers out of the way in the middle of nowhere, it puts up the Scope 3 emissions because employee commuting to work takes a part of that Scope 3 emissions. Those are some of the regulations and diktats from the EU on the left-hand side, CSRD, EED. The EU Code of Conduct for Data Centers is the most important one. That details over 150 best practices for the use in data centers and what data centers can do to become more efficient. We mentioned the circular economy. You probably don't want to be like Morgan Stanley. Fine $95 million through the incorrect disposal of IT. But IT forms an enormous mine for mining for rare earth materials and gold. But you need to make sure that how are you actually accessing that? Has customer data been got rid of? It's not as easy as you think, because the whole process needs to be audited. There needs to be a proper audit trail behind it. What do you understand about net zero? What does net zero actually mean? Well, if Professor Yan produces 5 kilos of carbon and saves 5 kilos of carbon, he's at net zero. If he produces 5,000 tons of carbon and saves 5,000 tons of carbon, he is also at net zero. What you've not done is you've not reduced the amount of carbon that you are producing. So what you need to think about is not just net zero, but how do you reduce the amount of carbon that you are producing? That's the important thing, rather than just looking at how we can get to a notional net zero. We need to reduce what we are producing. And remember, carbon is not the only greenhouse gas. There are another 6 or 7 greenhouse gases that also need to be kept in alignment. We've heard a lot about greenwashing. People talk about greenwashing and how bad it is, but what are we doing? Well, are we offsetting that carbon? Are we buying carbon credits? Often that could be looked at as an end of pipe solution. I've heard recently a lot of people are buying renewable energy. But if, for example, you are in Ireland and you are buying renewable energy from Norway, there is no interconnector between Norway and Ireland. Therefore, you've bought a virtual power purchase agreement. You've not actually done anything to decarbonize the grid to which you are connected. Therefore, if you're wanting to decarbonize, you must make sure that the grid that you are connected to has those renewables injected into it. If you've just bought a credit, what good's that? You're not actually doing anything about what you are using yourself. So we need to call out that abuse, tackle the problem, and remember, it's also down to you. Organizations don't do anything. It's the people within the organizations that do. Remember that list of 7 people? How did you get on with the list the first time round? Have a look there, see if you can add 1 or 2 more names to what we see. Okay, so let's move on and have a look at the data center market. Now, I've looked in particular at the area that I'm interested in, which is Malaysia and Indonesia. These are somewhat immature markets. They're developing. They have around about 100 megawatts of IT power in each country today. But within 3 years, they're looking to double that amount of power. So they are high growth markets. Why? Well, Indonesia has over 250 million people. It's got a very high population, all of which are connected, usually through mobile phones. Other markets that you see on the left elsewhere in Asia are somewhat more mature, but they continue to grow. Why do they continue to grow? Because we keep using data. We keep producing data. We keep downloading apps on our phones. We keep using our phones. All of this is really exacerbating the problem. But like anything, facilities age. What was a great facility 10 years ago is still using major plant infrastructure that is now 10 years old. It's using 10-year-old technology. It's no longer as efficient as it could be. But how do you take a data center offline to upgrade? Well, you try not to, because you're losing revenue. So it becomes much more difficult to upgrade those existing facilities that have become out of date. We often get excited about all these new technologies that we can build into new builds, but often the bigger problem is within the legacy facilities. To look at the market globally, the data center inventory in London is about 900 or so megawatts of power. There's 120 of that is 120 in addition to that is under construction. If you look at some of the other territories, like Mexico, for example, again, a very large population, it has just over one data center's worth of construction in there, 70 megawatts. And Africa is an untapped market. There are a lot of works hopefully happening within Africa. Again, they're using different power solutions. They're looking at geothermal, particularly for some data centers within Kenya. Other countries that have got the restrictions in place, like Singapore, are only able to develop 60 megawatts at any one time, and not all of that will go to one provider. Here is perhaps one of the biggest challenges that we have within data centers, and probably within the built environment in general: talent. But which one of these would you like? Do you want to work hands-on in a great entry-level pay position? The 24/7 industry, a global industry? If you have a willing to work attitude, if you have transferable skills, what do we mean by that? Well, if you've been demobilized from the military, for example, you're used to working in critical environments. You have great transferable skills that can be used in this industry. People say, oh, we've got NDAs, we can't talk about it. Rubbish. There are certain things you can't talk about, from clients, but what the industry actually does, you can. And there is no problem in talking about that. In fact, if you go away and if you know a young person, talk to them about data centers. Get onto YouTube, find that Colin video, and that will be an ideal thing to be able to show them to see what this industry is all about. Well, what opportunity is there? Well, if you go to www.datacenterpathfinder.com, and that's center with an ER rather than an RE, there you'll be able to see over 120 different pathways into the industry. It's not just all about construction. Controls, design, IT, operations, strategy, all of that is a part of this fantastic industry. The Nomad Futurist Foundation, of which I'm very proud to be a part of, is trying to create training courses free for people to be able to learn about this industry. And with JLL, who pay me on a day-to-day basis, they've joined in with Nomad Futurist to put together a technical development program that was announced recently. So not only are we trying to say, well, yes, there's a problem, but we're actually trying to do something about it. The center picture, people may have a laugh or a smile at, but a lot of people will not be in the industry in 10 years' time. Will I be in the industry in 10 years' time? Probably not. But if there aren't people coming in to replace us, we have a real problem. And with the amount that the industry is growing, we need more people. What can you do to be a part of it? Look at the pathways. Look at what Nomad Futurists can help you with to expand your learning, your knowledge, and your understanding. So JLL, Jones Lang LaSalle, the company that I work for, what do? Well, in project and development services, we undertake what you could either call cradle to grave or soup to nuts work around data centers. From looking at site finding, through to putting financial deals together, design and build, project and construction management. All of that gives a whole life cycle approach to data centers. And we're very pleased to be able to do that. In Asia Pacific, we're probably one of the leading companies. And globally, we're one of the leading companies for facilities management within data centers, and probably have one of the longest track records in being able to do that. In Asia, and we'll come back to kettles again if you notice, we have constructed data center projects of 450,000 kettles worth. That's an awful lot. Working for some of the biggest organizations in the world, people like some of the hyperscalers that are mentioned there, and some of the big co-location providers, people like Global Switch, STT Telemedia, Princeton Digital. We have a lot of people that work for us. 108,000 people are employed by Jones Lang LaSalle globally. And in Asia, you can see the figures there on how many property and facility managers we have and project professionals. Now, go back to your list of 7 people. Who did you get? Number 1, Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google. Steve Jobs from Apple, or the late Steve Jobs, we should say. Bill Gates from Microsoft. How many got Addison Rae? He was a TikToker. Jimmy Donaldson, Mr. Beast from YouTube. And Khaby Lame from TikTok. All of these have made absolute fortunes out of something that our 7th person put together. Sir Tim Berners-Lee. He put together the World Wide Web. How old was he when he put together the World Wide Web, which is basically an indexing system of the data center sites or the internet sites around the world? In his mid-30s. How old was Bill Gates and co when they put together Microsoft or Facebook or other companies like Google? They were all under the age of 30. People of that sort of age, like many of you on the call today, you're the ones that we're looking to for the great and bright ideas. We can't function without what these people have put together, but the newest and brightest ideas will come from people under the age of 35. But you need to be a part of this industry. We need to be able to embrace what it is that you think about and know. So thank you for your attention and looking at what I've had to do and present. You're more than welcome for that. And now if anybody wants to ask any particular questions, I'm more than happy, Professor Yan, to take any questions from everybody on the call.
Firstly, I'm very, very grateful for your wonderful presentation, inspiring and informative. I think if you like to ask a question, you can raise your hand or just pop in your question in the chat area. Feel free to ask any questions. You can raise your hand or pop the question here.
I'm sure out of 76 people on the call, there must be at least one question.
Can you see, James? Angel Veronica asked, in most of your career journey in data center, is there any effort in reusing heat produced by IT equipment? If there is, how do we do it? A wonderful question.
It's a very good question, and there are several use cases around the reuse of heat. The one everybody thinks about is district heating systems. It's interesting, district heating systems, they only require heat during the cold months. They don't require heat during the warmer months that we hopefully will come along. The problem there is that we need to have a 24/7 use case. So what we've seen companies like Deep Green that have put data center offerings together that are used to maintain the base load in swimming pools. For use in other things like biomass. Biomass needs to be dried before it's converted to energy. Those are really good use cases, that we have for the reuse of heat. More use cases are being developed. Some that I'm particularly keen on are things like coffee beans. Coffee beans need to be dried before they're roasted. So therefore, what we need is a dry heat. What do data centers produce? Dry heat. So there could be a very good use case there. Everybody enjoys a cup of coffee. So why is there such a huge concentration of data centers in North Virginia specifically? A lot of it has to do with land availability, tax breaks, as well as connectivity. It's often the reasons why there are data centers there. And I think it's particularly in the States, the tax breaks that they have is particularly interesting for them. And that was sometimes the case back in Ireland as well. What's the next level you expect in the data center industry? Well, I think the use of AI is rising, and how that affects data centers. Facebook or Meta paused their data center development program a couple of years ago while they went through a redesign period to take care of AI. So the rise of AI will happen, but cloud, which is what we're working on today, that will continue also to increase. Youngsters are ready to face this challenge. Through people like the Nomad Futurist Foundation, through the Rising Stars Initiative in the UK, we are creating opportunities for youngsters to be involved. The UTC near Heathrow in London has great programs around the use of data centers. Yes, the BESS systems, battery energy storage systems, Matt, are increasing in their use, but they need to be able to store enough energy. What we need is energy 24/7. A BESS system will only have a limited amount of storage of those batteries. So to combine them with something like fuel cells would be good. Are there any recommendations for training or professional certification for data center design build? If that is for people, you need to maybe look at organizations like CNET or DCD Academy. There are other training things available, but they do tend to be slightly more expensive, which is why I would recommend looking at what Nomad Futurist Foundation is able to do to be able to help you to understand what is going on. How can data centers be sustainable if they're built in Africa? Well, you need to think, well, if people in Africa are actually using those data centers, but those data centers are sited some way away, the financial hubs will have great difficulty because the latency will be a lot larger. Latency is the time of response. So to be sustainable, what they're trying to do is to use alternative technologies to power them. As I mentioned, geothermal being one of them. Crystal ball question. What percentage with immersion cooling, direct chip cooling over conventional air in the next 10 years? It will rise. The use cases and the technology needs to be improved. The fluids used in immersion needs to be environmentally sound. It will come on, it will increase. I can't give you a figure as to what percentage it will possibly be. Phase change materials in data center cooling that's where you get, a material like a fluid, changing from a fluid to a gaseous material and then back to a fluid. That's where we have the difficulties with PFAS chemicals. Chemicals like Novec 1230 contain those things. So they have to find a different phase change chemical to be able to be used in two-phase cooling. No, I haven't seen phase change materials as a method to store thermal energy. It's something I will look into. If you look at the RISE Institute, that's the Research Institute of Sweden, and the work that they are doing, you may find some interesting information there. The pros and cons of avoiding the use of lithium batteries. If you're going to put lithium batteries in a data center, they need to be in a separate building. The problem with using lithium batteries is a thermal runaway incident. That's when the batteries overheat. They need to really be in a separate building to avoid problems in major data centers like we have seen in Korea in recent times and elsewhere in Strasbourg a couple of years ago. We need to be able to keep them cool. They need to be monitored for thermal runaway. What about the possible integration of data centers in district heating systems? Yes, it's happening. If you look in Helsinki, for example, data centers there are connected to the district heating systems. As I've mentioned, we need to find a better way to use the heat, not just with district heating systems, because in the summer they won't require the heat. What do we do with the heat then? Do we just eject it to the atmosphere? There needs to be a 24/7 use case. So if it is also put together with something like a biomass drying facility, that will be good. Well, I'll leave that the last one there for Sibsi to make a comment on. I couldn't possibly make a comment from that.
Yeah, thanks, James. I think that is exactly what we're doing. James volunteered to present this valuable, highly technical presentation free of charge. So that is what we are trying to do. So this probably is the second or third in a data center. So if you're interested in data center, you can look into the website. We have a couple data center webinar free of charge. So you can just log in to the Sibsi or LinkedIn webpage. You can find all the information available there. So that is one way we try to generate and promote the knowledge, sharing the knowledge, and also we are later on we'll try to develop some knowledge series in written documents, working with experts like James to promote the technology. I think there's new question. Come on.
Yeah, there's an interesting question from Andrew regarding salt-based phase change materials for storing warmth or cooling. I'm not familiar with those particular technologies. But just coming back to a question that, yes, an absorption chiller can be used. Another use case for waste heat from data centers is being used by Green Mountain in Norway for fish farms and lobster farms, both of which require warm water, and the heat is being used to heat that water to be able to produce both salmon and lobsters. So again, there is a further use case for actually doing that. But there is also the ability to take data centers off grid. I have a use case for a 200 megawatt data center in San Jose in California that is not connected to the electrical grid, but rather it's connected to the gas grid. It uses fuel cells for power. The byproducts from fuel cells are H2O and CO2. What do plants need to be able to grow? H2O and CO2. So what the developer has done, they've built an urban farm next to the data center to make use of those two byproducts. They're also looking at ways to refine the CO2 for it to be sold in industrial manufacturing and food production. So there are lots of other technologies that are coming about to make use of heat. And I think whoever asked that question. I think it was Victoria Angel. I hope there's some other ideas there. And if you have any good ideas, go away and talk to somebody. Let me know. Let's see what we can do to get them sorted out.
Great. So we'll try to organize another kind of district heating related to data center webinars, possibly in after summer. So that is something we haven't fixed date yet, but we definitely want to invite you back for future events, and we can discuss more. That sounds very interesting. Any more questions?
I'm certainly always interested to come back and talk more. Those of you that already know me on the call know that I will talk about data centers continue. I think Mr. Pace knows that quite well. But I'm again talking at data center conferences next week about design of data centers and how data centers can take care of AI, what changes need to take place within design to be able to use AI. And I also write a regular newsletter on LinkedIn that you're all welcome to subscribe to moving forward, called Bytes, Watts and Carbon. Just look for me and you'll find the newsletter on there.
Thank you. I will definitely subscribe there. Thanks. Thank you. Yeah, agree with you, Peter. It's a great presentation, very inspiring and motivating. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. Great to see everybody.
Yeah, thank you. And keep in touch. We'll publish the videos on YouTube and the CPT website and LinkedIn. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye bye.